Most everybody here. We will call this meeting of the IWMA to order, and we will start with the roll call.
Ms. Bright,
I'm here.
Mr. Renz,
Mr. Enns was
Mr.
here.
Renz,
Yes, here, sorry.
that's okay, thank you. Mr. Hammond,
Here.
Mr. Heller,
Here.
Miss Marks. I did speak with her this morning and said she would be attending, so we'll check back with her.
Sasha, she's coming in right now.
Perfect. Give her just a sec. Mr. Newton,
Here.
Mr. Storton,
Here.
and Mr. Burbo.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Okay, and we'll see Jan or you'll let us
Jan,
know.
yeah,
Jan
she's
is
still
coming.
trying to log on.
Got it. All right, thank you. Okay, we will proceed to the Pledge of Allegiance, which I will lead us in right here. Please join me in saluting our nation's flag. I pledge
Pledge
allegiance
allegiance.
to the flag
Flag.
of the United
Of the United
States
States
of America
and
and to the republic
Public.
for
For
which it
which it
stands,
stands.
one nation, under God,
God.
indivisible,
Indivisible,
with liberty
Liberty.
and justice for all. Okay.
Mr. Burbo, let me
Yes.
just check in with Miss Marks again. Good morning or good afternoon, Miss Marks. We're just taking roll call. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you.
Got it. So we have everyone present. Okay, we will proceed to see if we have any public comment for any matters not on the agenda.
Okay, so we are in a bit of a different format, but if a member of the public wishes to make a comment, you may press the raise hand button. It should be found at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it right away, it might be under reactions and then raise hand. Or if you're on the phone, I believe *9 will still work. I do have one hand raised. Where am I? Okay. And Janine, it looks like you are up. Let me get my timer, Janine, then you should be able to unmute yourself. Come on. Okay, are you ready, Janine?
Yes.
All right.
Go ahead,
All right.
Jean.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I'm participating today in a national zero waste conference. Very exciting that citizens from around the nation have taken the say bull by the horns and are working on very creative, innovative actions to stop single waste and plastic waste in our nation. So this is one of my passions, as you guys must know. But I've been focusing on, as I walk my dog in the mornings, the trash that is being put in our blue bins and also the green bins and the trash. When bins are full, so full and overflowing that you can see the stuff falling out of them, concerns me. So I've been reporting this to the IWMA for several years with nothing happening. So finally, IWMA says, why don't I just call the hauler myself? And I sort of like, wait a minute, is this really my responsibility? So I did that, made 2 phone calls this past in November. And I sent a letter to, you should have each gotten a letter from me after 9:30. But this week, the hauler, in fact, took action and didn't pick up 4 of the bins in my neighborhood because the plastic was obvious as he would drive by. You know, has to stop the truck, jump out, put a yellow tag on the bin and leaves it full. The one bin that did have had the trash removed, or the blue bin, had a yellow tag anyway. It's one of the public, he has a business in town with 3 kids in school. So the message isn't coming down to to the people that fill the bins. And I can't wrap my head around it, but I'm going to work on this and keep pushing that the IWMA, who gets the bulk of our education dollars, actually gets out of their office, off their chairs, and gets this message out into the community. My letter responded from a couple of friends this morning. They said they had no idea that plastic bags weren't allowed with recycling in their blue bin. So now they will change their way. I did take the liberty to send my letter out to a couple friends in SLO, and I'm going to continue working on it, and I want your help. So that's it. Back to my seminar in 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Janine. Enjoy the seminar. Okay, do we have any other public comment regarding items not on the agenda?
I have no other hands raised.
Okay, in that case, we will go ahead and proceed to, looks like we have Jeff Minery, our counsel, to report out on closed session from our special meeting on November 23rd. Jeff, do we have any report?
Thank you. The report out is no reportable action.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, now, and we are going to go into closed session, which we're going to do so we don't have to get onto a different Zoom link and risk losing people and come back. We're going to use the chat room feature of Zoom. And so we're going to go into closed session to discuss 3 items, 6, 7, and 8. Public employee performance evaluation of the interim executive director. We're going to talk about appointment of an executive director, that process, and then when we come back, we'll have a report out from closed session. Do we have any public comment on these items before we enter into closed session?
A member of the public wishes to make a comment on closed session items, you may press the raise hand button on the bottom of your screen. Again, it may be in the reactions tab on the bottom of your screen if you can't find it right away. And I am seeing no raised hands.
Okay, then we will go ahead and go into closed session, and we're going to do that by Barbara is going to put us all into a chat room. That is all the board members and our legal counsel, Mr. Minery. And because this is a discussion of performance evaluation at this point, well, I didn't discuss this with Jeff beforehand. I'm assuming we will begin that discussion without Patty present, and we can bring her in. Jeff, do you have a comment on that? Is everybody already departing to join the closed session?
Yeah, I believe Jeff Minery is already in closed session. Patty, do you know if I need to add you? I believe you're muted, Patty.
As I understand it, wait until the board asks for me.
Okay.
Mr. Enns, were you able to access the chat room?
How do I do that?
Barb, did you?
And Barbara, can you put me in there first too? I'm sorry, I do need to speak in there with Mr. Avery. We're moving Mr. Avery first.
Oh, yeah. My apologies. Hey, Ms. Wright, do you need to go back to closed session?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Here.
Always amazed when this actually works.
Yes, really, it's always scary to push that button, isn't it? Yeah. Say, hey, I've been kicked out of better meetings than this, right? Okay, so let's see if everybody's back. We've got me, Jeff, Robert, Keith, Jan, Scott. I saw Karen there somewhere. Patty's back with us. Okay. All righty, we will return to our regularly scheduled programming. Item number 9. Well, first of all, Mr. Minery, will you report out of closed session?
Absolutely. The report out of closed session is no reportable action on either item.
Okay. All right. Thank you much. We will proceed to item number 9. Patty, the interim executive director's report.
Thank you, President Barpo. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, great.
Yes.
Okay, then. First off, I wanted to have Rob Hilton give us an update. He had to jump off to another meeting, but his staff, Nicole, is going to be giving you an update on the projects that Rob is working on it. Nicole, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. So first of all, wanted to give a quick update on the franchise agreement negotiations. We continue to support any of the member agencies that want our help in the negotiations. And our focus particularly has been with the Waste Connections group. So we have sent a revised version of the draft franchise to Jeff Claren that we believe is responsive to the concerns that Waste Connections has raised, and are hopeful that we'll be close to finalizing all deal points in our next meeting with them next week. In terms of the fee analysis that we are working on revising, we held a meeting with the city managers and general special district managers to discuss the fee study. We got good feedback about specific additional details and parameters that they're looking for in the report, including a reserve policy that the board will be discussing later today. And we have requested some additional information from the member agencies to help refine the fee analysis, which we have requested to receive by December 15th. Based on that data, we will send a revised draft report to member agencies on December 29th and hold a meeting with city managers and special district managers on January 4th to get final input before the January IWMA board meeting. Finally, for ordinances, we are encouraging everyone to get a first reading in for their SB 1383 ordinance by December and final readings by the end of January. CalRecycle appears to be using the adoption of these ordinances as a key criteria for agencies receiving SB 1383 grant funding in full and on time. So this is a priority as agencies that delay their ordinances may be subject to smaller grant allocation or delayed funding of that grant allocation. And that's what I have for now, but happy to take questions.
Thank you, Nicole. I really appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions for Nicole on any of the items she discussed?
I don't have a question, but I would ask, each board member, please, when you have your, I assume, weekly or periodic meetings with your city manager on a one-on-one basis, that you, check in with them on how, where they're at in terms of how they think it's going and where they're at on providing data for this issue, because the fee increase study and the additional information that the cities in particular have asked for is really critical to the future of the IWMA in terms of if we don't increase our fee, we are plowing through reserves in the absence of that increased revenue. So this, to me, this is probably the single most critical issue, operational issue facing the IWMA. Jan?
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that there still seems to be some missing information from the point of view of my City of San Luis Obispo City Manager, Derek Johnson. And I will email, because I've asked them specifically, you keep saying you need more information. What is it specifically you need? And I just this morning got an email with that, calling out the 4 or 5 different items that where they need more hard data. So do I email that to Patty, or who do I send that email to?
It sounds great, Jan. Just email that over to me and I'll make sure it gets forwarded immediately over to Cole and Rob Hilton. And we'll get that as
Perfect.
part of the mix.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
You
Thank
bet.
Okay. All right, Patty, go ahead.
Okay, so next up, I wanted to introduce our new special districts alternate, Dan Burgess. He is, as you know, new and recently elected for the special districts alternate. Now, Dan comes to us from Heritage Ranch, where he is the president of the community services district out there. And if I'm not mistaken, Dan is with us today. And I don't know, Dan, are you available to say hello, possibly introduce yourself?
Hello. Can you hear me?
And earlier you had your camera on so everybody could see your face, but I don't know if that's possible now. If you can, that would be great.
It says that the host has stopped my video.
Oh, how terrible of us.
There we
Hang
go.
on just a second here. We'll try to get that changed. Meanwhile,
I think you just did.
okay, excellent.
Come on.
Nope, you are still a faceless name right now.
I love technology. Mhm.
I know. I think we need an IT guy.
So
Go
Dan,
ahead and speak, Dan.
Okay, I guess I can speak. I didn't know if you saw me before, but I'm happy to be here. I'm delighted to be part of this group, and I think I can hopefully make an impact to this county and help you guys in some needed decision making on this. If I can get in there or whatever, I'm happy to be here. And if anybody needs to contact me, you know how to get a hold of me. I think Patty knows how.
absolutely. Yeah. So
My
Dan, thank
camera
you very
was
much.
working. Okay, no problem.
Sorry about that camera technical difficulties.
That's all right.
So we just want to thank you very much for taking on this job, stepping up to the plate. We greatly appreciate it. And just before I move on, is there any questions that you have for Dan or any comments from the board?
Just welcome aboard. As the alternate, I'm not sure,
Thank you, sir.
alternates might be hit and miss.
I'd like to
but-
make a comment, Patty.
Go right ahead, Mr. Enns.
Daniel, it's Robert Enns, and I want to welcome you
Yep.
and thank you for the application to take part in this. Your resume was very impressive, and you certainly got the vote of the Cayucas board. And I see you got several others as well. And there were some emails and notes saying that you and I should have a little chat. So hopefully I'd like to do that in person, and I'll be contacting you very soon.
All right, and I'm glad to be here working with you, Robert.
It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you. Thank everybody.
Thank you, Dan. Any other comments before I
I'm trying
move
to get my
on?
picture up. God, it still won't come up.
Go ahead, Patty. Go ahead and move on.
Okay, JPA MOA updates. Now, all of the 7 cities have passed their councils, and we're just waiting for signatures from the city of Atascadero, Grover Beach, and the city of Paso Robles. Sasha, our clerk of the board, has been reaching out. In fact, she did that again this morning, so we should get those documents shortly. When it comes to special districts, we have California Valley, Cambria, Los Osos, Oceano, San Miguel, San Simeon, and Templeton CSD, who have passed both the JPA and MOA by their boards. Avila, Cayucas, Ground Squirrel Hollow, Heritage Ranch, and Napoma will bring their documents before the board shortly. In fact, 2 of them, Ground Squirrel Hollow and Napoma, will hopefully have them approved today. That being said, we look forward to getting all of them in. Again, Sasha has been doing a great job reaching out to these entities to make sure that once they are past the council or board, she gets the signatures, or they get the signatures and send them over to us. So we'll keep you posted on that. And then finally, unless anybody has any questions on that, I'd like to see if there are any questions
Patty?
on the, oh, go ahead.
I had a short question. You mentioned Los Osos, and what's the status of Los Osos? Are they out with the county, or?
They are with the county, but they still, because they were originally signed that MOA, they have to sign it again. So but you are correct. They are still with the county.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? That's a good one. Okay, moving on to the last part, and it has to do with the expense report or the credit card report. You'll find the expense report on page 6 and the credit card report on page 10. Before we move on, are there any questions on those 2 reports? Hearing none, I think we'll move on then to the consent agenda. And that concludes my report.
Jan raised her hand.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
have
Jan.
A question. No, that's okay. I was a little slow there raising my hand. The question is, with science discovery, I am curious if we get actual reports from them.
Yes, we do.
About what is actually going on, and does the board ever have a chance to connect with these people? I mean, it's an incredible amount of money that they're taking, and I personally, this is my own ignorance, I personally just have no idea what they're really up to. You know,
Yeah.
why is this fellow driving 600 miles around? And why are we, you know, why are these regular monthly, really significant amounts of money being paid to them? What are we getting back, and how effective is the education they're doing? So I'm not accusing anyone of anything. It's just, I don't know. I've been on the board for a year now, and I still don't know, you know, how effective their educational program actually is.
So I love questions like this, Jan. So you asked for a study session on the legal bills for the executive committee to be broken out and brought to you in a study session at the next executive committee meeting. I can do the same thing with the science discovery bills. And we can take in, fortunately, they're all itemized out. You'll see exactly what the expenditures are, how they're expended, how the expenses are tracked and broken out. And there's a lot of detail there that we can supply you. So I'm asking you, do you want a study session on this as well?
Well, I personally would. I don't know about it if it needs to be the next one. The other question I had is about the $2,240 monthly social media charge that, again, keeps coming up regularly every month.
That is correct.
Yeah, and so I think we need to evaluate to make sure that we're getting, you know, the best return for our dollars in both of those 2 items. I don't know if other people have a clearer sense of what that money is going toward. Facebook ad? I don't know.
I think, you know, what immediately came to my mind is what Patty just mentioned, that, you know, we'd ask to see a sample of one of the legal services bill, but we should also see one of the, you know, Mike DeMilo education and outreach billings, so we can have a better idea of what it is we're paying for, and we can, the effectiveness, some of that is sometimes subjective, but I think it certainly behooves us to know what we're paying for and look at bills, and if we want to look in further detail. But I would encourage that any of the bills that a public agency pays certainly is open to any member of the board, and really open to any member of the public who asks to see them. So absolutely, I think at our next executive committee meeting, we should look at those bills, and if the full board wants us, Patty, to bring forward an example of those, we could do that as well.
Okay. So for sure, if I understand you correctly, science discovery, our legal and social media will be doing a study session on those in the next executive committee meeting. And I can bring those forward to the full board if that's what you'd like as well.
And does the full board want to see that, or you just want the executive committee kind of review that to get a better idea?
I'd like to see it, Charles.
Yeah.
Okay, then we'll have Patty
I
provide
agree.
in the next agenda packet, and we'll put it on the agenda for possible discussion, those items.
Wonderful. Sounds great. Thank you for that feedback. Appreciate it.
Okay, all right. Anything else, Patty?
Nothing else. That is it.
Okay, then we will go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. Items 10 through 15. I believe we had a correction on one of the minutes.
Yes, on item 12, I'd like to pull it actually.
Okay, so let's
and
pull item
then-
12, and then we'll
Okay.
discuss it separately. And let's just see if we have any public comment on consent agenda items 10, 11, 13, 14, and 15. Actually, I'd like to pull 14 as well for a brief discussion. So do we have any public comments on items 10, 11, 13, and 15?
Yeah, at this time, if a member of the public wishes to make a comment, you may press the raise hand button found at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see it right away, it may be in your reactions button, and then you'll see raise hand. Or if you're on the phone, you may press star 9.
Okay.
I don't see any hands for consent.
So in that case, we'll bring it back to the board. I'll take a motion on the consent items. Again, items 10, 11, 13, and 15. Do I have a motion?
Karen Bright, I'll make that motion.
And I'll second it, Jan Marks.
Okay. Motion by Karen Bright, second by Jan Marks. Any discussion? If not, let's proceed to the roll call.
Ms. Bright,
Yes.
Ms. Marks,
Yes,
Mr. Enns,
Yes.
Mr. Hammond,
Aye.
Mr. Heller,
Yes.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Storton,
Yes.
and Mr. Burbow.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. Patty, go ahead and discuss item 12.
Now, on the minutes on the item number 12, it was brought to my attention that there's 2 mistakes in it. So I'd like to completely pull these meeting minutes from the agenda, revise them, correct those 2 mistakes, and then bring them back to the board in the next meeting.
Okay. Any discussion of that? It's just administrative correction.
I just wanted to point out that was the correct way to do it, Patty, because it has been previously approved and we couldn't change it here at this meeting. So it'll have to come back. Thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Okay, so thank you. So I believe no discussion and no action is necessary. We're just pulling item 12 and bring it back to the board next time. And then item 14 is the staff compensation and classification policy. That was, you can explain it better, is on there to correct a few words, but I just wanted to make sure that the board he understands that by, following the county, when the county gives a pay raise, we're effectively going to give a pay raise, and I wanted you or Barbara to identify the fiscal impact of the policy and what the correction or addition is in item 14.
I'd be happy to discuss that. And just for the little background, please turn to page 27. And again, this was the intent once Mr. Bill Worrell left the building and Mike Giancola took over, that we were to mirror the county in pay. And so we did develop shortly thereafter a policy, which is in your board packet beginning on page 28. As you can see, it is rather lengthy, I apologize, but the meeting notes that support the approval of that policy are why that is so lengthy. But what's missing from that is when you turn to page 40, you'll see some red under policy details, Roman numeral number 2. There's 2 words that we would like to change or update, better said, is remain consistent with these classifications, just to provide further clarity. In short, like Mr. Barbeau said, when the county gets a pay bump or raise or change due to whatever their approval process is, we too will also get that. Now, Mr. Barbeau pointed out that I needed to add in the fiscal impact of this. And at this point in time, that's a $20,000, just over $20,000 fiscal impact to our budget. And I'd be happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, thank you, Patty. I just wanted to have that clarified for folks. Any questions from the rest of the board?
None from me.
All right, then I'll go ahead and take a motion. Well, let's see if we have any public comment on item 14 first.
At this time, if a member of the public wishes to make a comment on item number 14, you may press the raise hand button down at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, you may press *9. I have nobody for public comment.
Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the board for motion.
So moved.
Motion by Jan Marks. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, I believe that was Jeff Heller. Then a motion by Marks, second by Heller. Let's please, any discussion? If none, then we'll call the roll.
Ms. Marks,
Yes.
Mr. Heller,
Yes.
Ms. Bright,
Yes.
Mr. Enns,
Yes.
Mr. Hammond,
And no.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
Mr. Storton,
Yes.
and Mr. Barbeau.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1. 7-8.
7-1. So, okay. All right. Thank you. We will move on then to our regular agenda items. We'll start with 16. This has been we put this on as a regular recurring agenda item. This may be the last time we do it. Patty, I believe there was something that we wanted to address regarding our status of, the county's withdrawal.
Sounds good. So as you know, that is, as Mr. Barbeau explained, this is a standing item at the request of Ms. Marks and Mr. Barbeau. This may be the last time that you see this on the agenda, given that so much is settled with the county. But there is, due to the county's withdrawal, some lingering issues that I wanted to address, like the recent resolutions that the city's passed. And I wanted to quote from one of the resolutions. They're not all identical. This seems to be the most stringent one, but I wanted to address the resolutions. I want those who have passed resolutions to feel like the IWMA and this board is really addressing their issues and challenges that they want us to improve on moving forward. So I wanted to quote from one of them, and this happens to be the city of Aurora Grande. They're asking us to hire a third-party firm for solid waste management expertise to analyze fees, and again, I'm quoting, staffing structures, and make recommendations for programs and services that are not required by or in excess of state solid waste regulations. The report shall identify potential cost savings measures, and the IWMA board shall review and implement those recommendations to reduce costs and minimize expenses. The report must be reviewed by the managers of the IWMA's member agencies before it's finalized and implemented, end quote. Now, to meet this expectation, the fastest and least expensive way to do that is to engage Rob Hilton to do the analysis and provide the report. So my question to this board is, Do you want, or are you interested in having Rob Hilton do this? And that's just really a yes or no answer.
Do you have any comment on that from board members?
I do have one question, please. Yeah, I didn't know we were going to be discussing this issue specifically in regards to the county withdrawal, but I'm glad it was brought up. I think there is a sense, at least from discussions with my city, making sure that each of our member agencies are comfortable moving forward with their rate increases and ensuring that our citizens are paying the amount of money necessary to accomplish the tasks that need to be done. If we go with Rob, is this a different scope of the work that he is doing where we would have to go to bid to somebody else? Are we doing this properly? I just want to make sure that if there's a decision to do this, is it something we have to contract for as a bid process?
I'm going to make a quick comment on us discussing this, Keith. It's, it comes out of the county leaving, so it's kind of why it's coming here. We also could discuss this, I believe, very legitimately under item 17, where we talk about the ad hoc committee to address JPA changes, because this is one of the things that the cities put in their resolutions when their resolutions regarding staying in the IWMA after the county's departure. So Jeff Minery.
Thank you, President Barbeau, directors. Just to provide a little context and response to Mr. Storton's question, I understand about $60,000 remains in the budget and unused that was intended for Mr. Hilton's firm for the strategic planning. So that you have budgeted money for the strategic plan that remains sitting there waiting. To the extent that you desire to extend Mr. Hilton's contract, it would be an extension of the scope a little bit in time. You don't need to go back out to bid for that, but I would suggest just a real quick, brief amendment, give him a little extra time and a little extra authority on the dollar figure. Potentially you could take the 60 grand that is sitting in the strategic plan allocation and move that over, or any number that your board desires. But I think my discussions with Patty was that he may need leeway of about another 90 days to move forward on that. One final note on this issue, the comments of your city's member agencies in regards to the information provided to the rate increases, that is being addressed in the draft amendments to the new JPA to ensure that we've learned the lessons from this go around, and that we anticipate these types of issues raised by both Mr. Storton and Ms. Marks. So next time any sort of rate increase happens, the agencies better working hand in hand with the member agencies. So I have to say.
John Hammond.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I was just going to point out again, I would sometimes, and when we get into this issue with consultants and such, that an outside look, that a different agency, Rob, of course, wrote apparently most of the 1383, and I think it would be appropriate to have a different perspective, just for reference to the fact that, like on my airplane, when we have a mechanic looking at it every year, and then you have somebody else that comes in for 1 year, sees things that the other guy didn't or just overlooked. Again, it's important, I think, to have a fresh perspective occasionally on things like this. And so I'd be thinking that it might be good if there's another group out there that is working just as long and just as good, then we might want to get some sort of a cost from them as well. So.
Okay, I don't see other hands. I'm going to make a comment.
I believe Patty had her hand up.
I'm sorry, who did?
Patty.
Okay, Patty, go ahead and talk.
And the reason I had my hand up is I just want to do a little clarification, and this is not Mr. Minery's fault. This is my fault for not explaining it correctly. Just to be clear with this board, we currently have 2 contracts with Rob Hilton. One is a strategic plan contract, which, as you imagine, is on hold because we have so much in flux right now, again, with the rates and the policy, reserve policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, county leaving. This one is on hold, and the balance in that is $22,000. We also have a secondary contract, and again, it's because I know this because we live and breathe this. It's a secondary contract that's specific to SB 1383, and that has roughly a balance of $60,000, just for clarity. That's it.
And also to be clear, Patty, that and it might be getting a little off track here, but it's important to note that I think one of you alluded to it, and that is the current contract, the 1383 implementation contract expires December 31st.
That is correct.
And there's still 60, not only is there still 60,000 on it, there are still tasks to be done to assist our cities with implementing 1383 or in our jurisdictions. And so I'm not sure how we need to accomplish that, but we need to continue this contract with the 1383 contract with Rob Hilton beyond December 31st for that purpose. If we wanted to engage him to do something like this, that the cities have requested, to me, that would be probably more in scope with the strategic plan or sort of out of scope, and we'd need to either amend the contract or we need to go out to another entity like John Hammond alluded to. My thoughts are, on the one hand, all of our cities pretty much asked for this. And we're here to serve our cities. So I'm very open to it. I'm a little skeptical of it because I'm a little skeptical of, always turning to consultants to answer your questions. And this is not a big agency, that's got 3 people off in the 12th story somewhere and nobody knows what the hell they do. And nor does it have a hell of a lot of money for there to be a hell of a lot of waste, if you will. But everybody's asked for it. So I think it's something we need to pursue in order to comply with the wishes of our member agencies. And then you're torn again between, okay, you've got Rob, who has been working with this agency on these other things, understands it reasonably well, has a lot of expertise, can hit the ground running, probably spend less money on him, versus, as John Hammond said, you get if the intended purpose is an outside look, some folks who are asking that might think Rob Hilton's, been around the agency so long that he's gone native and is, one of us. And so you kind of between that, you could probably do it cheaper through Rob Hilton. If you want that totally fresh outside look, you're probably talking another party. I'm sure there's lots of consultants that'd be willing to do that. So I'm kind of open to hear what how the board wants to pursue this.
I think from my perspective, having Rob continue to do the work, if that falls within the scope of what we need to do, I think we'll probably save more time and get information that we need. I think at this point in time, the cities are just looking to build the trust back with the IWMA through some of the things that has happened. And I think gathering this information is just a helpful tool right now to help us communicate more, make sure there's clear understanding that the objectives of each party, each member's obligations and commitment to the organization is working and moving forward. And I think if we're able to get through this in 90 days, that would be helpful to build that trust. And then perhaps at another point in time, if we need to look beyond that, we look at a different contract. But I think right now, to save money and time and help achieve some of these objectives early and not put too much more of a burden on staff moving forward with Rob would be okay with me.
Okay, who else wants to weigh in with comments? I'm sure you guys must have some thoughts, because we do need to, at some point we need to make a decision, and it doesn't absolutely have to be today, but at some point we will need to make a decision on this. And as I indicated, it was pretty much, the language was not exactly the way Patty read it from the AG resolution, but it was pretty common in all of the city resolutions in particular. Okay, Jan, and then Karen.
I just want to say that I agree with Keith Storton and that we should move forward as quickly as possible on this. So thank you.
Okay, Karen?
I will just echo that sentiment. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got three folks that think the way to pursue this is to do it through Mr. Hilton's firm. John Hammond, I'm expressing a preference for a third, another, agency or consultancy, et cetera. Robert, Scott, Jeff, let's go to Jeff Heller first. He raised his hand.
Yeah, I agree with Directors Bright and Marks.
Okay, thank you. Robert?
Well, I'm going with the majority here. John, I appreciate your perspective there. And but I think that at this point, minding our budget and just getting the answers out, and I think as Keith said, building some trust with the community members it's going to help.
Again, just group, again, I'm not opposed to Rob. I'm just saying that sometimes it's good to have a different perspective is all.
I
And
appreciate that.
time is of the essence here too, that we need to get this information back to the different agencies because it's all going to relate to the rate, that we have to do. And I just don't want a whole lot of fat in that. In other words, what I'm trying to get at is Rob probably has some, Christmas list that you'd like to have everybody do, but maybe we don't have to do everything. That's the point. What's it going to be? Lean and mean. That's really what I think the city managers are looking for is what does it take to do this at a minimum rate? And then we can always look at things beyond. But at this point in time, Rob's definitely acquainted with everything. I don't have a problem, truly. I'm just saying that sometimes it's good to have another perspective is all. So I'm good with Rob too.
Appreciate
All right.
that.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. So if nobody else has any comments, I'd like to propose then that since we need to amend Mr. Hilton's FHF&H contract to go beyond December 31st, that we have Patty come back with also an amendment to engage him to do what it is the city's asked for, which essentially is to, look at all the things we do and identify anything that is not, not required, and they're identifying any potential efficiencies in how it is that we do the things that are required. But have Patty come back with a revised scope for HF&H. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so Patty, that good guidance to you then?
Absolutely perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, and as I mentioned on the issue, this item number 16 regarding our status and impact of the county's withdrawal, this should be the last time we need to have this item on the agenda. The county has withdrawn. We have the transitional MOU in place with the county to continue to provide services until June of 2022. So don't see that we have a need to have this item on the agenda as a regular recurring thing anymore. So I think that's progress. So,
Charles?
Yes, Robert.
Just a comment there. We're trying to come up with a negotiation with the county to how to move forward here, and the reports that we're getting back were everything's going wonderful. Don't worry about anything. It sounded too good. Personal life experience says when you hear something like that, you better be looking for where's the catch. And so I know that there was a letter, Jeff, regarding some issues of money, and I know we were going to follow up with a letter back to the county, and so I'm being a little bit nervous about everything going so smoothly. So I don't know that we need to have this on the next agenda, but if something does pop up, I think we need to be aware of it.
Right. Jeff was going to draft a letter to the county in response to their original request. We had discussed it in closed session. So I don't know if you can address the status of that, Jeff, here, or we need to address that. I mean, you were going to do a draft at some point.
Right. And I will get a draft over to the president and ASAP. We'll get that out.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right.
I'd just like to say that if something does come up with the county, that perhaps Patty could include that in her report, in her interim director's report, so that even if the item is not there on the agenda, that we at least are going to know what's going on, and hopefully can deal with it and give staff direction.
Sounds good. So far, it's been great. We've had Wendy Hall, Peter Cron come over and work with our staff on site on how to break down the billing and separating out the hazardous waste facility and everything. It's been great. Last Friday, we had a meeting with, again, Peter Cron and the new lead for that department over there, Mladen. Absolutely fantastic to work with. It looks like it's going to be a great partnership.
And the name Patty referred to the county hired a new, I'll call him garbage person or whatever, whatever the title is. Mladen, is that the last name or?
That's his first name,
First name,
Mladen,
okay.
and the last name, and forgive me, Mladen, if you're listening, I think it's, and I believe he is listening if you wanted to chime in. His last name is Ben Dof. Oh, and I'm so sorry if I said that wrong, but he's he's leading the entire division on solid waste. He's going to be great in the position. He has lots of experience, not necessarily with solid waste, but with water and water resources. He's just absolutely fantastic to work with. And during our last Friday meeting, staff walked away with a really good feeling. He listens, he's interested, he's engaged. We couldn't be happier here at the IWMA.
All right, thank you, Patty. Okay, with that, we will move on to item 17, discussion of our ad hoc committee to update and amend the JPA. Jeff, I believe you're the person to talk about that.
You're on mute,
Looks like you're
Jeff,
muted.
sorry.
Apologize for that. Thank you, President Barbeau and directors of the board. Currently, following the first meeting of the ad hoc committee, we had circulated a draft ahead of time, received comments, had a robust discussion of the changes proposed for the revised joint powers agreement. I have since taken the input from the member agencies and special districts, revised the draft a second time. Currently, it is in the hands of President Barbeau. I intend to speak with him shortly about that, and then we shall, as soon as we get any fixes or clarifications necessary, I believe will be circulated, and a second meeting of the ad hoc committee will be scheduled.
Right.
Did I capture that okay?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I'll look over the changes you sent me yesterday, and then we'll talk, and then we'll, get it out to all interested parties, which includes, the city managers and the CSD general managers and the members of the local task force, and anybody else who's expressed an interest, our board members for comment. We'll schedule another meeting, and then we'll hopefully be able to wrap things up. The meeting we did have was pretty well attended and had a good cross-section of the kind of folks I just mentioned, and had some good feedback. And so some further, changes were made. The most, I guess, maybe in some ways, the most substantive thing was one of the city managers asking us to include a provision that, the JPA allows the IWMA to set fees, but that the fees, the JPA would, or the IWMA would provide the necessary information for cities to implement, go through their 218 processes as deemed necessary. So anyway, so I think, we've made progress on that, and we'll continue to work on it. Robert.
Just a couple of things. We had a discussion regarding putting an additional special district member on the board.
Right.
And I'd like to see what the board thinks of that. And also the fact that the special districts have only one member on the board. And we talked about potentially making all of the special districts, quote, members, depending on your definition, understanding that only one of the members votes, or if we put two people on, two would vote. And then I had only one other comment. With the draft that we have at the JPA on the very end of it, before the signature page, It says something about the effective date. And it says this agreement shall take effect upon its execution by chairman or mayor and clerks of the governing bodies of the county of San Luis Obispo and at least 4 cities. So I guess I'm nervous about seeing the word County of San Luis Obispo in any of this document. And I'm assuming that this refers to the cities that are in the county. But I thought there were 7 cities and 11 districts or something. So I didn't know if that last thing needed to be revised or not.
Jeff, can you clarify for Robert?
Thank you. Director Enns, I did catch that. That is, all those little nits that you're seeing have been corrected in the second round.
Okay.
And so there's more than just that. The focus the first time through was not on those types of details, but more on getting substantive responses. So I think you'll find upon review of the second draft that those types of issues have been addressed and corrected.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Robert,
I would like some feedback though on adding a special district member and making them all members with a different voting arrangement.
right. Thank you, Robert. And I apologize that I did not mention that as a significant, very significant issue. And the discussion, and Jeff explained that under the, how JPAs are created, you have one special agency member, but that there may be a way to have additional voting representation. I think we talked about also using the word participant in the agency for others who are not the explicit member. Jeff, I don't know if you need to explain that further, but I agree with Robert. It would be good to get some feedback here as to how folks would feel about having a second representative of the CSDs on the board, bringing the board membership to 9. So Jeff, do you have any clarifying comments?
I will, if I can. The clarifying comment is that the Public Resources Code provides for the formation of a regional agency, which is what the IWMA is. The code is very specific that one special district can be a member. And so the question is, if you wanted to get to having additional representation, like 2 representatives from the authorized districts who represent approximately 50,000 people within the county, how would we go about doing that? Based on the restriction of the Public Resources Code, I've identified a mechanism as to how to put that together. That is part of the proposal that I've sent to President Barbeau. And so ultimately the question is, we participating agencies, I think Mr. Enns is inquiring as to the appetite of this board to have 2 representatives from the authorized districts as opposed to 1. One possible benefit, at least for your consideration, is that with only 1 representative, you have an 8-member board. With 9, you have an odd number, which would certainly help in any sort of contested item. But that, of course, is not a deal breaker. It's just a point of interest.
So curious about people's feedback. I mean, I would make 2 comments that I made in the meeting. And by the way, I think John Hammond and Robert Enns and Keith Storton all had really good inputs at that meeting, very helpful. On the one hand, I don't know that we need an odd number because, as we've, I hope, learned from the past, we don't want close votes in the IWMA. So, I'd rather, in some sense, a 5-3 vote is a better majority than a 5-4 vote, because hopefully this agency won't have 5-4 votes on that one. On the other hand, I've added up the CSD populations, and they're right around in total of the represented CSDs, right around the total of San Luis Obispo's population, maybe teeny bit bigger even. And my take was that, if they represent more residents than our largest city, maybe they deserve 2 seats. But I can certainly, from my own perspective, see this one either way. So I'm going to start with John Hammond and Karen Bright.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. I was kind of going back to my thought, I think originally was that we need to kind of go back to individual populations of each group. Indeed, if CSDs as a group outweigh, a particular city, then I think, again, that is something that we need to look at. But on the other hand, we have small cities too that have equal votes. So that's what I was trying to get at. If we can proportion the number of seats to total population, I guess it's going to be a difficult way of doing it. But I personally like to have odd numbers on a board, if nothing else, to make, be able to have a quorum. Sometimes we don't really have that problem, but on the other hand, breaking ties is really important too. Not that like you say, I hope we don't have that close of votes all the time, but maybe again, exploring, each city's population and figuring it out what is worth, per seat divided by 9, and figure out how that would work.
Okay, thanks, John. Karen?
Thank you. I don't see the downside. Is there one? Am I missing it somewhere?
Good question. We'll go to Keith and then maybe we can talk about that.
I think it's a good solution moving forward. I think it provides more citizens with representation. The discussion part would be, how does that get separated into 2 different voting people? We had discussed North County representative, South County representative. We'd have to have some formula that allows that to be split equitably, I guess. But I think in the spirit of representing more people and getting more feedback on a regional group that has important decisions to make about our region is good. So I'm in favor.
Okay. Thank you, Keith, and thank you for the reminder that there was some discussion, and if you had two CSD reps, you might have like a North County and a South County one, or an inland and a coastal one. That would be something that would need to be addressed if a second voting representative was added. Okay, any other comments on that? This will be discussed, this issue. It's important to get the direct board feedback, but this will also be discussed at the next JPA committee meeting. And, I didn't get I would expect by that time we'd also get some feedback from city managers on this issue as well. Might be something you would ask your city managers about. But I'm sensing a fair amount of openness to the idea, and no particular objection at this point to the idea of adding a second CSD representative to the board. Any further comments?
Thank you.
I just like to say, I think it's a good idea. I think the geographic distribution would be a factor. And the other question I would have is how many people are actually in that CSD, in that special district. To just look at, if you had a really small CSD, you wouldn't be getting the representation that we're putting out there as a goal to have better representation. So I'm not sure how that would work, but it would probably be up to the CSDs. They only meet once a year, right?
As a group. As a group.
Maybe they could meet twice a year. I don't know. Maybe they could get a little more organized so that they can make that decision. I'm not sure if the IWMA wants to, I'm not sure to what extent we would want to kind of micromanage their choice of their representatives. But I think it is a good idea to have 2 CSD members.
Charles?
Thank you. Yes, Mark. John?
Yeah, I think maybe this might be an agenda item for the JPA ad hoc to address and bring back to full board for discussion, kick around a little bit. I think if we have, maybe Jeff can bring some numbers of population for each agency or CSD, that might be good to do for that discussion, so we can kind of get a rounded approach to this, so the rest of the board can kind of make a finalized opinion. So
thank you. And I do have those numbers available. Patty sent those to me when I asked for those numbers when I was drafting this latest revision. So I have those available.
Right, because John, when we have the next committee meeting, I think it'd be good if Jeff provides draft language to allow for that possibility, so we don't, talk about it and then having to go back and create language. You could come with language. It could be talked about in the committee meeting. So there'd be a straw man to endorse or pick apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Jeff Heller.
Chair Bourbeau, yeah, I support the idea as long as it's tied to population. That's all.
All right, thank you. Okay, I want to see if we have any public input on this matter, on this item, number 17.
At this time, if a member of the public wishes to make a comment, you may press the raise hand button found at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're on the phone, you may press *9. And again, if you can't find your raise hand button, it may be in your reactions. I'm not seeing any hands for public comment.
Okay, with that, I think we've discussed that. We've gotten some good input and feedback, but there's no particular action needs to be taken today. So we can move on to item 18, which is discussion of our reserve policy. Patty?
Yeah, so as you know, this item 18 starts on page 66, the staff page. And again, what we've been asked by the full board is to bring back a reserve policy, as well as this special districts in the city have also asked for this to be in writing. So what we brought before you today is two options. Barbara, can you move the slides forward? Thank you. So the first one, and I'll let Barb jump in on these slides, is really just operating reserves that's maintained at 25%, and then capital reserves at 15%. And then option number 2 is operating and capital reserves combined, maintained at 25% total. So let's back up on the slides a little bit, and let's start perfect, right there. Oops, right there. Yeah. So Barb, go ahead.
Sure. So I wanted to do a brief overview for the members of the board as to the thinking and methodology behind the creation of these options. Where I started was really going back to our core values and our mission statement, which, as a reminder, is to provide coordinated efforts to comply with state waste and recycling policy on behalf of member agencies through practical, cost-effective programs, education, and technical support. And in order to do this, this policy really needed to create a long-term financial stability for this agency. And we would do that through creating it with best practices. That policy would allow us to that policy allows the agency to have flexibility to plan and respond to changes in industry markets and, of course, the legislative from California state. The key factors, during the research phase, when I started looking at that, I went through the cities, the CSDs, different JPAs and special districts. I looked at the Government Financial Officers Association, also known as GFOA. I also took webinars from the California Special Districts Association. They offered quite a few trainings on this subject. And really, they all had the same advice, was to start with a risk-based approach, which required us to determine the unique threats of this agency and to plan accordingly. So then when Rob went and did the city manager meeting, we got consensus from all of the city managers that our liquidity needs were around 20 to 25%. And that decision was based on certain risk factors, the fact that we have a stable income stream, it doesn't seem to be changing, it is monthly, we don't have to wait for tax revenue to come in. We don't have landfills or MRFs to consider in our policy. So that 20 to 25% the GFOA recommends as a starting point looked really good to everybody. And then what we did as an agency is looked at our specific risk factors to further inform us as to what we needed. And we outlined that inside the policy. And that they are, just so you know, is the authority has two main sources of income. It's that waste management fee that we assess to the franchise and permitted haulers, as well as the landfill tipping fee. The fees that are paid to the authority are done in arrears, which means we get paid a month behind. Sometimes it's longer, but it's never less. Those fees can fluctuate based on market and industry conditions. As we are diverting tonnage, which is the direction that California seems to be going, our landfill tipping fees should be seeing a decline because we're diverting the tonnage out of the landfill. We have 5 hazardous waste facilities that require staffing, safe cradle to grave material management, and specialized fire and equipment that need to be maintained, updated, and replaced in the event of a failure. And the authority really historically has always used a pay-as-you-go financing, which is a very fancy way of saying we pay cash for all of our assets. We also wanted to keep in mind the needs of our agency and how we could meet those state mandates for everybody that is a member. Now, before we go dig further into our options, I did want to bring up a little issue that we had. President Barbeau asked me a question about that emergency reserves, which prompted me to look up the resolution, and I found an error in our assumption. We were always assuming that was a $500,000 reserve that we left it, but as you can see in the verbiage of the resolution, the board gave the executive director the power to spend $200,000, with the president having the ability to raise that amount to $300,000. So we're proposing that we drop the emergency reserve to $300,000 instead of the 5. And then we're also going to add some verbiage as to where that number comes from, mainly the reserve policy number in the name, so we can track that better in the future. So now we come to our options. This is option 1, which Patty described for us at the beginning. It is our liquidity needs, which is also our operating reserve, would be a 25% of planned budgeted expenses. And I gave you an example of what it would be for this fiscal year. So our planned budget expenses was around that 3 million mark. So of 25% is now 1,031,000. So that amount goes back to the risk factors 1 through 4, which again were our 2 main sources of income. The fact we're paid in arrears, the fluctuation of markets and industry, and then the tonnage diversion. And then to cover the other 2 risk factors, our HHW facilities and the pay-as-you-go financing, I created a capital reserve fund to be used for purchasing and replacing and maintaining capital assets. Now, the GFOA recommends that it's 25% of accumulated depreciation, but when I ran that number, it was around $111,000. I felt that was a little too much because we don't have a landfill or a MRF. So I looked at the 15% number, which is, you can see, is at 67,000, which looked like a more palatable number to me. And then as you can see, the emergency fund, we dropped to 300,000, and then we have that DTSC HHW closure fund at $1 million. So your total reserves that you're looking at would be $2,398,000 for this option. And then we go to option 2, which you will note is virtually identical to option 1. Here again, we decreased the emergency fund by 200,000, so we made it a max of 300,000. And the main difference of this option is that it doesn't have that capital reserve fund. It is included in the liquidity needs or the operation reserve. But in order to cover for those capital needs, the capital expenses would be included in that number. So that is your main difference in these 2 options.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Appreciate that breakdown and detailed explanation. Does any of the board have any questions on this before we move forward?
I'm going to make one quick comment though before I go to Keith.
Okay.
You know, one of the reasons it's here for, Patty alluded to it, is, or Barbara did, that in our discussion and the rate setting meeting we had with Rob Hilton and the city and general managers, they're concerned that the number that Rob was using initially, 50%, was higher than needed, but he acknowledged it was a placeholder. And the reason they're concerned about that is, the more we stash away in reserves, it means having to have a higher rate on our hauler fee. And so it caused us to say, okay, we need to look at this. And since we are an organization, 50% happens out there in the world, but these are people who operate major facilities like landfills, et cetera. We don't. We operate HHW facilities, we own forklifts, et cetera. And so, we can afford a lower reserve. On the other hand, we're a small agency. We've been, as we are taking time to get to setting this new rate and getting it blessed, we are using up reserves. If we had 25% in the past, we might be heading towards a little bit of trouble right now. But in any case, this, they asked us to come up with a policy. We said, yep, we'll do it. And we'll do it as soon as possible. And so that's what's presented here today, these options. So with that, Keith.
Thanks. Can you clarify for me the emergency fund? Do we physically have $500,000 now? And if we change this policy, we'll drop it to 300,000, leaving a balance of 200,000 that goes somewhere else?
That is correct.
And we just don't know where that 200,000 would go yet. That hasn't really been discussed. Is that?
Well, it would stay in our current reserve balance, but it wouldn't. So it wouldn't be like we go out and spend it. It would just mean we don't need to maintain as high a reserve as we had.
Well, then, but it would be a $200,000 that would go back into our general fund as an expense for a program or something that we would decide to allocate during our budget.
Yes, that the $200,000 would essentially go back into your pot for use. But since we're spending down reserves as much, that just means that we won't have to raise as much next year.
Right. But in a perfect world, if it worked okay, if we weren't spending the reserves like we were now, I was just wondering, as we get whole and complete, that there is a value to that money there. My second question is, as we look at our capital expenses and our budgeted expenses, and we do need to use our reserves for an emergency, different than what we're using them now. But when would we decide to use our reserve fund that we're going by policy with the 25% or the emergency $300,000? When would we choose to use one over the other?
So I'm sorry, the emergency fund, that $300,000 can only be used in what I would describe as an extreme emergency. For example, we have a hazardous waste facility in Napoma that's right next to the freeway. Let's pretend that a semi flies off that freeway and plows right through our facility. That $300,000 would be instantly used to clean up the hazardous waste and address that immediately. Or if we had some weird earthquake or a fire or an explosion, that's when those emergency funds would be used only during situations like that. And does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's helpful. No, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Those are the only questions I had.
Hey, I'm not sure. Oh, John Hammond, your hand is a different color. I didn't see it as prominently there.
Yeah, white hat. So for years, when I was sitting on this agency, I always was concerned about the amount of money that we were garnering. In other words, I think an agency should be designed for what it needs and no more. And we ended up making a decision that we would buy our office. The office that we were in there, it currently is ours. We were paying rent. So that was an asset, capital expense that we decided to invest in. I think, again, option two, where we come down to 300,000 is fine. And maybe now that we have this extra fund, maybe we might want to put that money aside for maintenance. In other words, things that we, another account for the office or anything else that we might have that is going to be unexpected. It's an old building, right? And all things are, we're talking, remember Brooks was talking about the foundation. So things like that, now that we do own an office, we have to think about that as well. But as far as, you know, a level of funding, I don't want to tax our citizens any more than we have to make things happen, right? Yeah. But yet we do need some reserves for emergency things. So whatever we can do to adjust our budgets, and I think this 300,000 level as a reserve would be, in my opinion, okay, and a good number to hit. It is 15%, I believe, or roughly of our budget, is it? I can't remember exactly, 25%. So I think that would be my druthers at this point, just for discussion purposes.
Thank you. Jan?
Thank you. I just would like to hear a little bit more from staff about option 1 versus option 2. My tendency is to be interested in option 2 just because wanting to keep our fees down as much as possible. But I don't think I've heard a real recommendation from staff about what would be the plus and minuses of these 2 options.
So I'll jump in on that, Barb. I personally, from a staff level, I prefer option number 1. And the reason I prefer option number 1 is it gives us a little bit more cushion. So when Barb was doing this amazing amount of research, and every time she'd pull a report from like a city or a special district, what we kept seeing was that there was a reserve for this fund, a reserve for that fund, and a reserve for this fund. So as a city or an entity similar to that, you have multiple reserves depending on the fund. The problem with the IWMA is we have one fund, right? And so we don't have the ability to go, uh-oh, this fund is in trouble. We need to pull from another fund. We don't have that luxury, right? Also, with our capital replacement needs, we know that our HHW facilities are aging. We know that they're pushing almost 20 years old, and they're modular units with fire suppression systems in them, specially designed. And we know that we're going to have failures coming up. We also know that our forklifts are going to be starting to fail coming up. So having that capital replacement is going to be very helpful, again, because we don't have the luxury of pulling from another fund inside like a city would. Does that help answer your question, Jan?
Patty, on the
yeah,
I hope it helps,
I
Jan.
think so, but under option 2, wouldn't we still be able to address those capital needs?
Yeah, see, Patty, I think if you look at the total on number 2, because number 2, we're including 25% of planned budgeted expenses, including capital expenditures. If you go to option 2, we're actually, it kind of has the same effect. And I think it's easy, maybe it's easier to understand. If you show option 2 on there, if you'll note the total on option 1, 2 million it's actually higher. The total reserve is actually higher under option 2. And I think that's probably easier to understand, as well as the thing about when you use depreciation as a number or a basis to build reserves. We all know that if you built a building or you bought a forklift, if you built a building for $1 million or you bought a forklift for 50,000, and you're depreciating that depreciation has no resemblance to what you're going to pay to replace it. Because when you replace that forklift, it isn't going to cost 50,000, it's going to cost $60,000 or $70,000. And so I think basing it on your planned replacement schedule for the equipment and or any planned repairs or maintenance of the physical plant, it probably covers it best. And I think option 2 in a sense is easier to follow. There's only 2 components.
True.
And easier perhaps to explain to people that the 25% is not just of ongoing operational, but also of capital expenses. And for me, it's easier to explain and to follow, and has essentially the same and a $20,000 different result actually to the grader. So does that make sense to folks? Keith, do you have a comment?
Not a comment, just another question. I do appreciate the explanation, though.
Mhm.
In regards to our reserves, we're certainly using reserves now to pay multiple things. How long would it actually take us to build up our reserves to, I guess, the 1 million plus level?
Barbara, do you want to jump in? It depends on the rate or lack of rate
Yeah.
increase.
That will depend on the rate increase and the percentage that we are planning. And we can definitely stretch this out as much as possible so that we're not needing that big jump right at the beginning, and that we're planning to build these reserves over a period of 2, 3, maybe 5 years.
Okay.
But you know, with market changes, the sooner you can get those reserves up, the better, because again, we don't know what's going to happen if,
Right.
you know, COVID-19 hit us all this year. And I know from reading quite a few of the cities' financial papers that they were all touting how their reserves are what carried them through.
Okay.
So everybody's going to be working on building these reserves this year. So we are also going to be working on that.
Yeah. And that was kind of the point of my question. This will take some time to even get to the level of the reserve policy we would need to cover certain costs moving forward if we had to use it.
Correct.
Well, to be clear though, Barbara, are we not actually right now a little bit above this reserve level, but we're spending down? And so, you know, we're on a glide path to go below this reserve level.
Yeah, at the end of this fiscal year, without any rate increases and with the savings that staff has already done, we are looking at about I think it was like $400,000 above the 1.5 that we had. Now it's going to be 1.3, so that's a little bit more of a cushion for us. But it's going to take some time to rebuild that.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not having to build today, but we need to set a policy in place that reassures our agencies, member agencies, that we don't have too much reserves, you know, so we're minimizing the impact on our hauler fee, and with that, we've got to be able to sustain this level of reserve. Jeff Heller.
Thank you, Chair. I like option 1 because I like capital expense buckets. I don't like mixing it. Capital expenses seem to come up the short end of the stick oftentimes if they're blended with other buckets. So my preference is option number 1.
Okay, do we have any other comment or questions?
May I make another comment, Mr. President?
Sure.
I prefer option 1 as well, and I hear what you're saying about the accumulated depreciation. You're not really accounting for replacement cost. But this does allow us to change these percentages a little easier. When you lump everything in as 25%, first off, you're using your current budget. So this year's budget, we had a plan for $300,000 in capital expenses that we're probably not going to have next year. This also doesn't account for any kind of emergencies that would happen. Like Patty was saying, some of our HHWs are coming up on 20 years. Those fire suppression systems could go down. We've already had to fix one of them. And so if we go with option 2, then we would either have to plan for those to go down, or we would be dipping into those emergency funds for something that's not really an emergency and can be accounted for in another
Okay,
portion.
thank you, Barbara. What I'd like to do, I think it looks like it was Jan texted me. She has a hard stop at 4:30, and I realize we're running kind of long, and others of you may have other things you got to get off to. So we'll try to get this to a vote. Let's see if we have any public comment, and then we'll bring it back for a motion and discussion or any other questions. But let's go see if we have any public comment on this item.
Sure. At this time, if a member of the public wishes to make a comment, you may press the raise hand button found at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on the phone, you may press *9. I am seeing no public comment.
Okay, great. We'll bring it back to the board. Does anybody have any further questions or comments, or are we ready to have someone make a motion in favor of either option 1 or 2, or some sort of a modified version of one of them? So I heard comments kind of in support of either one of them, and no particular, no particular objection in main. So would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion, please.
Charles, yeah.
I'd like to make a motion that we select option 2, just in light of our fiscal circumstances right now and some unknown circumstances. I think that's the most conservative option at the moment.
Okay, John.
Hammond was second then too.
Okay, so we have a first by Storton, a second by Hammond in favor of option number 2. Do we have any discussion of this motion? Okay, and seeing none, let's go ahead and do a roll call.
Mr. Storton,
Yes.
excuse me, Mr. Hammond,
Aye.
Ms. Bright,
Yes.
Mr. Enns,
Yes.
Mr. Heller,
No, no,
Ms. Marks,
Yes.
Mr. Newton,
Yes.
and Mr. Burbeau.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-1.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, we will move on to, I believe we're ready for item 19. This is a discussion and consideration of compensation for interim executive director. I guess, I don't know, Mr. Minery, do you want to do that, or should I do that?
I can do this.
Okay.
Thank you, President Barbeau, directors of the board. There is a staff report that is being published to the website. So I'm going to quickly go over the main points and try to be quick because of Ms. Mark's deadlines here. In April of 2021, your board approved the reclassification of the program director, Patty Taves, to the deputy director position with a corresponding job description and pay scale. The reclassification was to help with the implementation of SB 1383 and other policies, and consistent with the board's previous direction to track the county salary structure. The deputy director position was categorized as deputy director with 30004 number. And a corresponding salary range starting at $111,000. In March, just prior to this coming to your board, the former executive director had sent this job classification to Patty with the job description and identification of the lowest range of the salary at $120,744. And Patty approved the job description and classification. However, when it went to your board, it was classified as a position consistent with the county's ag commissioner and weights and measures position, and not that of deputy director. So recently it has come to light of at the staff level that it appears that the intent of this position was to classify Patty as the deputy director, consistent with the deputy director of planning and building at the county, which would match the starting salary of $120,744. And so it appears that there was an error on the presentation to the board on April 14th. And so for discussion today is the discussion of your board as to adjusting the classification, reclassifying Patty's position as deputy director so we get the right number that corresponds to the county salary schedule, and then to discuss whether or not your board desires to move Patty from $111,000 to $120,744, which would correspond with that correct county salary schedule. And what you'd like to do about the difference of the compensation Patty has received from April 14th to this present day, if your board decides to make any sort of a correction at all. And with that, I will turn it over to the president.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And the board will recall that this was partially discussed during our closed session discussion of item, whatever item it was regarding performance evaluation. So a little bit of background of this. Does the board have any questions on what Mr. Minery reported on? Or any discussion? Okay. Because essentially what I see is the option on the table is to establish Patty Taves at the $120,744 salary rate, retroactively effective to April 14th of 2021.
Charles, John.
Yes, I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just throw in as a comment, I think, again, I support this. Again, if we made the agreement and it was a clerical error or something happened there, then we should honor that and retroactively as well. Patty's doing her best to hold us together, and I think it's certainly fitting that we do this. So that's my input. I would recommend approval.
All right, thank you. And let's go to, well, let's see if any other board members have questions or comments, and then we'll go to see if there's public comment. Okay, looks like we'll go out to public comment.
Yeah, at this time, if a member of the public wishes to make a comment, you may press the raise hand button found at the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone, you may press *9. I am not seeing anybody for comment.
Okay, then we'll bring it
President
back.
Barbeau, if I could phrase, because I don't think you have staff report in front of you, you may not. I could help articulate what I believe would be a motion if you'd like me to.
Yes, please. I do have it here in front of me on the small screen, as we'd say.
Okay.
Yes, please put it in the form of something that a board member can endorse as a motion.
Thank you, and I will do it so that it's could be followed by so move if desired.
Okay.
The motion would be to correct the classification of the deputy director to the corresponding county position of deputy director number 8980 and adjust Patty's compensation from $111,529,000 annually to $127,444 annually, and make a one-time adjustment of the amount that would compensate Patty from April 14th to the present day to compensate her for those that time where she was paid as a misclassified employee.
So move. Hammond, so moves out.
Keller, second.
Okay, good.
I believe
All right.
Jan has her hand up.
Oh, nope.
Go ahead, Jan.
You guys beat me to it, so I support the motion.
All right, and I think that one motion was by John Hammond, but I've missed who got in first on the second.
Mr. Heller.
Mr. Heller. Okay, so we have a motion by John Hammond, second by Jeff Heller. We have any discussion of the motion? Then let's go ahead and read the roll call.
Mr. Hammond.
Aye.
Mr. Heller.
Yes.
Miss Bright.
Yes.
Mr. Enns.
Yes.
Miss Marks.
Yes.
Mr. Newton.
Yes.
Mr. Storton.
Yes.
And Mr. Barbeau.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right, thank you. Okay, I believe we are up to any member comments or future agenda items. I think the first piece of the future agenda would be us we'll be having a special, when Mr. Minery contacts the executive committee, we'll be having a special executive committee meeting. We also, Karen, did you have your hand raised for comment?
Yes, when you're done, I just wanted to
Okay.
bring up something. Thank you.
Sure. And what else did I say? We're also potentially going to have a special meeting potentially on revising the contract for HF&H. So that's what I see on the future agenda. Does anybody, we'll go to Karen, start with Karen, see if anybody else has any. So Karen?
Thank you. I was just gonna circle back to our original public comment at the beginning of our meeting from Janine Rands regarding the overflowing trash bin issue. And her, it's been so long now, I hardly even remember, but I do know that it was an issue that she felt would be an IWMA responsibility rather than a personal resident of the county to deal with overflowing trash bins and those that have inappropriate items inside of them. Not quite sure where to go with that, but it seems like it needs to be addressed somehow.
So I'd like to respond to that, Karen. That's a really good point. The problem is that the IWMA doesn't have a contract with any of the haulers. The cities do, right? So we're kind of out of the loop on that. If a city chooses to designate the IWMA for education, outreach, lid flipping, contamination, we'd be happy to do that. And I think there are some cities who will do that moving forward, not positive, but I think that will happen. So you can look forward to the cities who do designate that or delegate that to the IWMA, who will be taking that on.
So then to just kind of complete this. So if this is an issue in, say, my city, I would take that to my council. And then we would then discuss whether we want to deal with that internally or if we want to give that responsibility, I imagine it would be compensated, to IWMA. Is that what I understood?
That's correct. Absolutely correct. Every single city and special districts moving forward is going to be asking the same questions. What do they want the IWMA to do for them or not? And one of those items is contamination monitoring, lid flipping, education, tagging in the field, walking the streets, so to speak.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I appreciate the information.
You bet.
Thank
Good
you. John
question.
Hammond. I'm sorry, John Hammond.
Yeah, I was just gonna come back on Karen there too. Yeah, it's up to each member agencies to enforce, these things. We as IWMA do not have the personnel to do that. So it comes back to the individual city or CSD to enforce. What I was going to mention too, real quick, just for my edification, and in the future, Patty, is there a way we can get at the end of our calendared agendas that we have future meetings? In other words, I think we have it set up right now for January 12th. It's going to be our next one that's calendared, but on our agendas, it's always nice. I always refer back to these as to anything that's scheduled as a public meeting, JPA, for instance, or next calendar meeting, something like that, just as a reminder for the public, also edification that that's where we're going to be meeting next. I think it's important to put those kind of things in front of us, and that's what our
Excellent
city
point.
She does
We'll
have
do
it on the
that.
screen. She does have it on the screen right now.
We'll make sure it's on the
Yeah.
agenda though, too. That's a great point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
on the paper agenda. That's what I'm hoping to.
Mhm.
Sure.
Good point. Thank you.
All
No
right.
problem.
That's
Okay,
all I
any
had,
other,
Charles. Yeah.
thank you. Any other comments? Sasha, do you have a clerking
Yes.
question or comment?
Yes, I do. John, were you wanting one? I'm accustomed to having 3 meetings. The following 3 meetings, do you want just one, or did you want maybe up to 3? What would be your preference, or the rest of the board?
Yeah, that's how we do it too. Pretty much for the next 2 weeks because we meet every 2 weeks.
Correct.
But we're every 30 days essentially at this point. So anything in between this meeting and the next meeting that's calendared should be listed for public information. That's where we're going to be meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. If no further comments, I think we're ready to adjourn. Anybody have anything before we depart? All right. Seeing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Merry
all.
Christmas.
Holidays.
We'll
Happy
be
New
seeing you
Year.
probably before then.
Okay.